So I remember then here comes another transition point in my year of discovery. And I remember the day she fired me, she was like, well, I was talking with my mom. I don't really think I need these sessions anymore. And so I remember just standing there in the doorway, kind of something like, oh, like here comes another transition point. And so my principal was actually standing there looking at me. She was like, oh, she said, it's the biggest compliment you could get.
Hey there, KNC family. I'm really excited today to welcome you back to another episode of Kingdom and Culture Podcast. And today's guest during our short stories of authenticity is Mrs. Vicki Keys. Hey, Mrs. Keys, how are you?
Hi, I'm so glad to be here with you this morning.
I'm so glad that you're back. I really am. You always share so much with us and so much depth of knowledge and wisdom. And so I'm excited to hear your short story of authenticity.
I'm so glad to be here with you this morning. And today I'm going to be sharing what I'm calling a year of discovery. So I'm just going to back up just for a little bit of backstory. And when the COVID shutdown happened, I was actually working on my life coaching certification. And so what happened was from 2012 to 2019, I was actually kind of recovering, and my family had a tragic loss. And so it just kind of took a program that would help me grieve my loss and process my pain. And I had gotten in a place where I knew I was stuck. And so I didn't want to stay in that stuck place, and I recognized it for myself. So anyway, when God brought me, through that program, I remember the day that he did, and I was with a group that was meeting to be a hub for this restorative ministry. And the lady said, I was sharing with them that morning how I had just had this beautiful vision of God just sitting up on his throne, and I could only see his back. And he was in this big robe, like, the Santa Claus robe, but like with the super long train. Mm-hmm. I didn't get to see any of his skin. I didn't get to see any glow. It was nothing like that. But I literally got to see the backside of his robe. And I did not get to see the imprint or impression of his arm. I just got to see the motion of him reaching down to get the hem of his robe. And I couldn't even see the figuration of his hand. But he moved the bottom of the hem of his robe and kind of swung it. And it was like a wave coming up on a shore. And then when the wave went back, everything was smooth. And that's exactly what happened when I got my emotional breakthrough from the loss of our only son. So from that on, it became, my personal story was working through, I stayed in the program, the restorative program. I just continued to work through the restorative program. So I went from grieving losses and got my breakthrough. And then I was like, they were like, we have another course called Understanding Emotions. I said, I'm in. So I went through that, and they were like, you are taking this in like a sponge. And I really was, because at that point, when you go through a dark experience like that, and you go through all those phases of loss and shock and anger and just sadness, deep sadness, anxiety, just remembering how things transpired, and you come out of that, it's just a different place that you come out in. And I was just open to just receive all of the restorative help that I got. And I just stayed there. And then I found it very fascinating. And I was like, wow, this is really interesting. And so then we went through different parts of the curriculum where, like, you would find out, this is what a healthy family looks like. This is what an unhealthy family looks like. And I would come back, and our youngest one was the one who was at home during that time. And so basically she got her certification at the same time, because I would come back and I would go, oh, I'm so sorry I found out about this tonight. And what I realized was this was not unhealthy, girl. We were dysfunctional in this, should have been operating like this. And so she began to learn it and take it in, right? Wow. So fast forward now at 23, she's one coaching all her friends. They come to her for advice. And, so God really used it as a time of discovery. So anyhow, then when the COVID shutdown happened, God led me to start my own business. So I had been teaching, we homeschooled our children. And then after, they were kind of grown and gone on off, I stayed in the private school and just began to work in the private school sector. So 10, 11 years, they found out, well, I actually do have a BS in biology. And they were like, we need a science teacher. And so I began, kind of working in there. And when God called me out of the classroom, one, I went into depression for about a week, just a real sadness, like, I don't want to leave the classroom. How sometimes you meet times of transition and you're not always, willing. Sometimes you're kind of reluctant, like, geez, I was really enjoying this. And what do you mean, God, we've got to move on? So he was like, start your own business. So, so when I came out in June, I began to take on full time building my own website. So I began that process and kind of working alongside of some tips and videos from the GoDaddy team. And they were like, when I got them to do just the back end work, because I did everything else, they were like, who did this website for you? And I was like, well, I did. And they were like, man, this looks like something we would design. Because I did the custom colors that I wanted to match my car and all of that. So anyway, the reason why that part of the discovery was so important was because up until that point, I was really kind of technologically challenged and, intimidated by, I don't know how to do that. And, just sitting there and just waiting for somebody else to always be able to do it for me. And God showed me through that, no, we got to break through that. We got to overcome this. So that was that part of it.
So good.
Still talking about the year discovery. So anyway, when I finished that up, I found another piece, the actual life coaching piece, and I went on and got my certification in that. And the school, a local school called me. They had one student there. And she was really going through her grades had plummeted. She had some hidden self-destructive habits going on. She had an eating disorder. And so I began to work with her one-on-one. That was like my first life coaching student. Okay. And boy, her grades were restored. She got in a leadership role. She was, socially engaging and leading, and her weight was restored and just really looking good. So I remember then, here comes another transition point in my year of discovery. And I remember the day she fired me, she was like, well, I was talking with my mom, and I don't really think I need these sessions anymore. And so I remember just standing there in the doorway, kind of something like, like here comes another transition point. And so my principal was actually standing there looking at me, and she was like, oh, she said, it's the biggest compliment you could get. Right. And I came home, I was still sunk. I came home and my husband was like, honey, it is really, in my coaching, it is the biggest compliment that you can get, that you succeeded. Right. And so then it was from there that what God gave me was an entire school. Then I had 78 students. And so that's what I spent all of last year doing. So then I developed my own curriculum to help teachers and teams of teachers and administrative staffs to help students like with anxiety and to cope with the emotional side that is involved with learning. And the reason I call it the whole student project is because it would be nice if all you had in the classroom was a head and a body, but you don't just get a head. Right. You get you get all of it. You get everything that's inside of the head. You get all the thinking, all the feeling, all the willing. Right. So you get all of that. And so anyway, I launched my entire program. And then after I launched the entire program in December, it was like, you know what? I'm finding that students begin to come one-on-one and they begin to talk through the different issues and things that struggles, anxiety, all of that. We see improvements. And I would see students go from coming in really heavy and really sad, to we would actually have some really good conversations with laughter and see them smiling and grades coming back up and getting their focus restored. And that was going really well. So then I was like, well, it would be nice if we had a school-wide campaign launch, and we'll call it the Emotional GPA. Because, it was in December and, January, everybody starts a new year. So we were like, well, you make goals for everything else. Why don't we make emotional goals? That's great. And so the principal thought about it. She was like, that's a good idea. What do you call it? I said, the emotional GPA, because we need to increase that too. So we launched it, and then I had some teachers come forward. So I did with one of the health teachers, we incorporated emotional strength and mental strength with her curriculum. in the health curriculum. So I helped her co-design it the way, she wanted it to flow. And then I facilitated something called a heartness table discussion. So what she wanted to do was she wanted to give her students emotional prompts for 14 days where they journaled their experience. And then I coached them along in the emotional side of the journey to be able to separate how they were feeling from how they were thinking, and really being able to look at the pattern of feelings and thoughts that they were having. Okay. So the heartness table discussion, what that is you bring the whole group together now that they understand how they think and how they feel, and they can distinguish the two. And they had this whole 14-day journey of writing prompts. And so what I did was I facilitated a discussion around different questions. Just picked a good 10 to 12 is enough. And if you see that it's starting to kind of get exhausting for them, you tailor it off. So you can back it down to 8 or, however many questions you need, and you see that they're engaged. At the point that they were like, okay, I'm done with the experience, you like the moon and you wax and wane. So then I helped co-facilitate a class with her, and just talking about internet safety and emotions. And it's just interesting that in that particular one, we did find out that cyberbullying has increased like 500%. So kids are getting a lot of emotional decline there, and it has a toxicity to it, if you will. Okay. So anyway, the other class this is where my year of discovery really took root is it was one particular class called House, and I worked directly with the principal. So I was like, okay, listen, I said, give me some ideas of what you want to work around. And so she was like, I can't think of any ideas. So she handed me this bag full of 30 different books. And she was like, I don't know where to go with this. So I began to come home and kind of read through them like it was like a book frenzy. And just had a great time just sorting, and I sorted them out in stacks that, put them in 3 different categories. And then, I kind of looked through those stacks I finally ended up with 1 stack of 7. Okay. And then after I got through the 7, it was like, okay, it's time to narrow it down. And I came down to 3. But there was one in particular, and I had no idea that God was going to use it to take my personal year by storm. And that one was called Strength Finder. So what I would do is the kids already had a lot of activities. I mean, it's a very dynamic school. It's a project-based kind of school. Sure. Hands-on. They do a lot in the community, and the rigor is already strong. So adding 30 more books or even 7 more books, from January to May was way out of the ballpark. Right. So I said, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because this is where I am really, really gifted and very, very creative, is I can translate curriculum and content into an exercise that personifies the traits and characteristics of the book and the lessons that need to be learned. So that's exactly what I did. And I did it all of February and all of March. And I met with all of the 9th, 10th, and 11th graders. Wow. So what we found out is when we got them engaged in exercises that demonstrated concepts, they began to come for counseling. And coaching. They would begin to sign up, and they were like, I really need to talk this through. And even the ones who didn't come, because they were so engaged and so hands-on during the sessions, you could see, like one day I had them make these banners. And I was talking about when challenges come, that how our responses have to equate. And I kind of use the banners to kind of show levels of, if you have a challenge and you meet it with the same level of response as the challenge, you can have success. But if the next time the challenge rises higher, see, it's above my head now, and you come with the same response that you did last time, not you know how you have to kind of raise. So in that process of them creating these banners, and then I have them come up, and I would get them to move them and just actively be engaged in the exercise. One young lady took her banner home. She was like, ooh, and I could tell. Now, I had her come for one session earlier in the year, and she hasn't been back for a session because she's just thriving and grades are back up. She's really not dealing with that issue anymore. But she did take that banner home. That's and great. I know that, she's going to rise to another level with that. So that was my realization. Awesome. So anyway, the one thing that happened was we had this one book called Strengths Finders. And what I did is I had the students, I printed off all the strengths on like different strips of red paper.
Okay.
And I envisioned this first, like, how will I teach them to look for the gifts that they have? And so then I gave them this exercise where they had to go around the room and kind of socialize and swap the gifts out with one another and to find the ones they were looking for, at least 3 out of these 34 typical gifts that they could have. And so it gave them an awareness. What it did was it got their eyes off of looking at what their peers are doing. Am I accepted? And just all of what they're normally looking at, and shifted their vision to looking for your talents, looking for your gifts, because, that's a motivator in these times where, other things can be distracting. But if you're, searching after your gifts, your purpose, your calling, it is the force and it is the substance of faith that can hold you differently than other people who don't have that. And what we were finding was, this year we did see a lot of behavioral acting out, because there were students who did not know what to do with the negative energy, the negative thoughts, the negative feelings that they were dealing with.
Okay.
And their outcome was not as good as the students who kind of followed a course with, let's put your eyes on this. Let's look at this.
Sure.
Let's, getting engaged with their gifts and their purpose. So in that time frame, I actually found out, I was like, once I read the book, then I took the little assessment that goes with it to find out what my personal gifts were. And it was like, how you have those movies and somebody goes along in time, and when they go back in time, that little light and that sound like shh, and then they go back to that space, it's like, the light that kind of snatches them back, and then it'll be a flash, and then they're back in this scene of a previous time. And literally that kind of thing began to unfold for me. Like, so my top 5 gifts were strategic, which means they said it's something you cannot learn, but you can come up with at least 2 or 3 different scenarios and solutions for a problem, and you can come up with it so quickly that people are like, no, you didn't put enough thought into this. No, I don't want to move on that. But it's because it's such a strong gift, and it's my number 1 gift.
Wow.
And I would begin to see flashbacks of times and conversations when people like, well, no, but it was working. Yes, it was working. And so my second gift is relator. Like, I actually find satisfaction in deep relationships with people, which is what makes life coaching for me, and life coaching in smaller groups so fulfilling and so satisfying. And then empathy was my next highest gift. And I really can kind of see where a person is coming from. Like, instead of shutting somebody down and saying, no, you shouldn't feel that way, I go, well, why do you feel that way? And, how long you been feeling like that? And, where'd that come from? And it's such a natural flow for me. And now when this happened, like my little flashback, like, oh, that makes sense why those kind of scenarios will happen. And in fact, I remember our youngest daughter, she used to say when she was probably her, teen, 16, 17, I was like, well, I'm going to run out to the grocery store. And I was like, you want to ride with me? She's like, no. And I was like, well, why not? Why? And she was like, because somebody is going to tell you their whole life story. You're going to end up praying for them or sharing something with them. And, we're going to take an hour to just go in there and get some mayonnaise. So I don't want to do all of that today, And so, so I would begin, have those little flashback times. Then individualization was my 4th one. And that's when I really can see the uniqueness in every person. Like, I don't group people in I don't believe there's a blanket. Like this works for everybody. I'm not a blanket kind of person. And as a matter of fact, I remember God really strongly, I would say it was a little bit beyond conviction. But I remember one day he said, do not ever again use this blanket kind of statements, like a therapy for people. Don't do it spiritually, don't do it naturally. So for example, in the spiritual community, like if you were sharing with a ministry couple and there's the typical response, if you husbands love the wives and wives submit, and it was typically wives submit, and it just always had the same blanket.
Sure.
It wasn't always the real solution. In fact, it didn't even listen to what the real problems were. And God was like, don't ever do this again.
Yeah.
And I remember him bringing me out of that. And it's because I'm not the only one who has individualization as a gift. God has individualization as a gift. He looks at all the billions and billions of people in this earth, and he is looking at every single one of us. Before I formed you in your mother's belly, I knew you. He did not say all of you, the blanket of you. He said, I knew you, the one, you. Y-O-U, one personal person. He's looking at every single one of us individually. It's amazing. And then the fifth one was learner. And obviously I like continuous improvement. How can I help? And so I think that my year of discovery, what I really found out was God had really been taking, this experience that I had that was not good. It was not glorious. It was really a walk through the dark in the depth of loss and the hurt and the sadness, the depression, the anxiety, the recalling all of that. And he actually made this part of my mission.
Wow.
To help other people who were experiencing darkness, were experiencing, deep sadness, heaviness. I could really, individualize, but relate to. So I don't say, well, yeah, I understand that. I don't throw my experiences out there for them. I listen to their experience. But the thing is, I can empathize with them because I can relate to some of the places that they're in. I don't have to have every single experience, but I've had enough of the combinations of experiences personally. And then the empathy, gives me that piece of care. Like, there's just no substitute for care. And, by being in this position where I was able to come in on the coaching side, they will really open up because I'm part of the teaching team now. And they would really, just share. And there were some hidden things that came out that I was able to really help them through. It's very satisfying to really see them come through with a sense of joy and breakthrough. To see breakthrough is an amazing thing. And to see it individually is just such a blessing. But this experiment that I had this year with the whole student project allowed me to see it in groups, like to see it begin to manifest. Now, I see that all the time on the spiritual side because, in my position in pastoring, I get to see that in a group. And then people come back and say, I'm thankful for that, what you pointed out with that. But to see God equally use this was truly just a blessing.
That is beautiful. I'm so appreciative of your story and just how, through the tragic loss of your son and through all of that pain, how God was able to just the intentionality of him to help navigate that path. And even now, self-discovery to say, you know what, you've been working all along. That's just so beautiful. So I really appreciate you sharing that and, just your story in terms of discovery for this past year. It's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, guys, until the next episode, we will see you guys soon. Bye.
All right. See you. Thank you again.